very good morning to you all. And on behalf of the Irish Music Rights Organisation, I want to say that we're delighted to be associated with your annual conference once again. This, I believe, is the 6th IBI conference supported by IMRO. As was said last night, both our sectors are interdependent and rely on the domestic economy, and none of you will need any reminding of how difficult the last 5 years have been. Radio, though, is a resilient sector, and the recently published JNLR results suggest that radio continues to flourish. Some 84% of Irish adults listen to the radio every day. Nationally, according to AdWorld, the combined share of the independent radio sector now commands 68% of the total radio market between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. These are impressive figures and demonstrate how powerful this medium continues to be. I note from the agenda that social media is a topic today also. This is very relevant given the effects of its influence in broadcasting over the past 2 years in particular. The reporting of live events, the ability of peoples to organise as never before, and the consequences of unchecked social media comment appearing live on air have all featured here at home and further afield. These issues alone demonstrate how important social media can be to broadcasting, but also the potential consequences, and how the veracity of news and current affairs is still paramount. Last night we were delighted again to showcase the very best of Irish creativity, with IMRO Academy members demonstrating the breadth of quality of music among the IMRO membership. Ensuring our composers, authors, songwriters and their publishers continue to derive an income from their creativity is at the very core of what IMRO does. Minister Rabbitte will be aware of the copyright review undertaken by the Department of Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation. On behalf of our members, IMRO have made its views known to the review committee, seeking to have in place a balanced suite of copyright legislation that rewards creativity on the one hand and promotes innovation on the other. Pitting both the creative sectors and the information, communication and technology sectors against each other is disingenuous and entirely unnecessary. We will continue to cooperate with the Intellectual Property Unit at the Department in ensuring our legislation in this area remains fully up to date at national level, and to make our views known at European Commission level also, where copyright is high on the political agenda. Ireland, I'm glad to say, is bringing copyright issues to the fore during its presidency of the EU. And IMRO will continue assisting the Department of Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation in formulating the Irish perspective. Bill Whelan, IMRO member and IMRO Academy founding inductee and composer of Riverdance, among many other compositions, will give us a unique insight later into the reality of composing music and how audiences experience and consume music today. I'm particularly looking forward to Bill's contribution. I hope you have all enjoyed the events so far, particularly last night, and I wish you all a successful conference, and today will bring new insight to our respective businesses. I want to thank both Lisa Nikushalaha and John Purcell for all their help and cooperation in putting this together, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Victor, I'd like to thank you for your words. I wasn't here to hear them. I feel like the Australian, cabinet minister who was on the live, whatever it was, Channel 7 in Australia, and he was asked what he thought of the minister's words, and he said he agreed with them. He said you didn't hear with them, but I'm sure I would have agreed with what he said. So I'm sure it was very nice, Victor, so thank you. But on a serious note, we'd like to thank IMRO for their support. It was a real privilege to be here last night for the IMRO Academy, at which 6 of Ireland's greatest musical artists were honoured for their creativity and for their contribution to Irish life and culture, and for the joy they have brought to people. IBI is delighted to be involved with IMRO, and we share many of the same goals in the promotion of arts and music and the unique part it plays in Irish life. But as well as that, it's also a huge economic contributor to the Irish economy, just as independent radio is. I'm very pleased to welcome Minister Pat Rabbitte here today, and I thank you, Minister, very much for taking the time to attend. We know you have a Cabinet meeting this morning and there are very many pressing issues at hand. I'd also like to thank the Minister for engaging constructively with us in relation to the issues we're facing as a sector since he's come into office. And we're delighted, Minister, to have this opportunity to put our views to you once again. I will do so in a forthright way, and what I say is intended to be constructive. Last night, as I mentioned, was a great night. It was a welcome respite from the daily grind of keeping the show on the road for everyone who's there, because operating radio in this environment is a very difficult task on a daily basis. We're faced with Ireland's economic woes because independent radio stations are, for the main part, small and medium-sized enterprises. We're employers, and we're involved in economies up and down the country, and we see the difficulty that people face. Last night was also, as well as being most enjoyable, it was a welcome break in time from adjusting to the ongoing flow of absolutely unexpected and gobsmacking events, which I suppose you never get used to. Like, for example, Dan Healy, who I know was on many people's mind, a highly respected guy from independent radio. He was Chief Executive of IRS Independent Radio Sales, a sales guide to his fingertips, and a commercial radio operator known for his populist, provocative and edgy approach. And Dan is now becoming head of 2FM, which, as you all know, is a national radio station focused on the delivery of public service broadcasting to a younger audience. 2FM, where the public service ethos is obviously far more important than grabbing audience or revenue, and there'd be nothing trivial or commercial about 2FM. But Dan, his appointment signals the renewal of 2FM's public service commitment, and we're sure we can look forward to fewer promotions and more discussion, debate and examination of the issues that matter to listeners' daily lives. More state-funded public service broadcasting presented by people that the listeners can identify with. The morning talk show guy, for example, who accepts that he must play his part in the recovery of his company and indeed the country and take a savage 30% pay cut to bring him to €50,000 a year. That's a good bit higher than most people in independent radio would earn, but to be fair, he does a TV programme as well. Oh, sorry, I think I said 50,000. I meant 500,000, sorry. But anyway, best of luck to Dan. But there's no doubt Ireland is a funny place, and it isn't all a laughing matter. There is commercial uncertainty in the radio industry, and it's huge for RTÉ and from ourselves. A few years ago, someone in an ad agency said to me that looking ahead more than a week was what is now considered strategic. But this conference is intended to be strategic, a brief respite to look ahead to the future, to look beyond the next week, month, or even year, and hopefully an opportunity for debate and discussion about the future of independent radio and of public radio. We've used the phrase future shock with a question mark after it. Future shock, in the book by Alvin Toffler, is a state of near paralysis brought on by the speed of change and technological development. Are independent stations future shocked? I think not. We have been flexible, responsive and adaptable to date. But it's important that we take some time to plan properly for the future of radio, and I'm very much looking forward to the sessions and debate. Broadly, as an industry, the question is how do we prepare for the future and ensure that it is a future that we can shape for the good of our industry, the employment we provide, and for the service, most of all, that we give to the Irish people. For we are in a time of enormous change, and so it is an opportune time to reflect. Not only that, but at this time, most of our members are in the middle of a process of renewing their licences or embarking on the process, with some with the uncertainty of facing competition for their licences. And we know that broadcasting legislation is in the offing, and so it is very important that it is got right. But it is not just independent radio that is in a hugely uncertain environment. We are seeing huge changes across the entire media landscape, and I think we should see our role in this context. 10 years ago, when we were getting our licences or renewing them, there was no Facebook, Twitter. It was all Bebo and MySpace, and it was Napster that was going to be the platforms of the future. and putting radio out of business. But we're still here, and Bebo and MySpace and so on have faded somewhat. Who can tell what we will be talking about in 10 years' time? But there are tectonic movements in the media landscape, and we cannot take anything about the future geography we will be operating in for granted. You can get a sense of the enormity of the changes that have taken place simply by looking back. 25 years ago, there were no legal independent radio stations on the air. RTE ruled the airwaves. Today, as we sit here, our members of the independent broadcasters command 67% of the Irish radio market. We have achieved this because our stations provide content that people can identify with, because our content reflects the lives of people and their concerns, and we are in touch with our audiences. They are people like us. Thankfully, the contribution made by independent broadcasters has become well recognised at all levels of society, by our listeners, by the community, by voluntary and sporting organisations, and by the Minister and even by RTE. But the landscape, the legislation and the framework by which broadcasting is organised has remained largely unchanged. And so as we look into continued financial uncertainty, the big question is, how can we shape the future? Now, when I talk of broadcasting, I'm talking about both independence and RTE. And I'm going to speak at some length about RTE and its impact, because despite of the share that they have of the radio market, I believe that RTE, through its commercial activities, its recruitment policies, the salaries they pay and so on, play a disproportionate influence on Irish radio. This hasn't arisen overnight and is the culmination of decades of dominance where the state broadcaster came to enjoy a cosy position in Irish society. This has been brutally shattered in recent years, but this provides an opportunity. I'd like to emphasise that I respect the work of RTE, and they provide hugely essential services. Often their output is of a type and nature that simply could not be provided on a commercial basis, and this is hugely valuable and important. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank and mention some people in RTE who we work with very positively on initiatives such as Choose Radio, the JNLR, Radio Gauge, and the bringing of the Radio Days conference to Dublin next year, which is good for the Irish economy, good for Irish radio, and so on. People such as Paul Mulligan, Anthony Whittle, JP Coakley, and indeed Noel Kern. These are people that we work with, we like, and we feel we can work with into the future. But on a broader canvas, in the coming months, decisions will be made about broadcasting that will reverberate throughout the Irish radio landscape, perhaps for a generation. In the public debate, RTE as an institution is seeking to frame the debate in a way that suits their objectives. And this is understandable, but the subtext appears to be that if the state provides assistance to independent radio, RTE will be irreparably damaged. Last Friday in the Irish Times, the Director General of RTE is quoted as saying that RTE needed some security. My response is, don't we all? But RTE cannot be allowed to dominate the discourse or to monopolise the future, because we feel this has gone on too long. What is essential is that the debate and decisions that are taken are grounded in what is best for Irish audiences and not just what is best for a single institution. If that approach is taken, we believe nobody should have anything to fear. We must all have a viable future, independence and RTE. And I would ask the Minister to work to ensure that there is a future not just for RTE, but for the independent sector as well. For it seems to us that too often the debate and discourse about the future of Irish media takes place as if RTE are the only ones that ultimately matter. For us, it sometimes appears to us that the response is, you're commercial broadcasters, you took on the risk, tough luck if you go out of business. But we're not simply commercial broadcasters. We are required by law to provide 20% of news and current affairs content, we say. Well, you do that anyway, is often the response. To us, we feel that is not acceptable as employers, as investors in the Irish economy, as people who work hard bringing a public service to the Irish public. And it is not fair to the listeners who vote with their ears in the daily choice between ourselves and the state broadcaster. All broadcasters are not the same. and RTE and independent broadcasters are not the same. We don't expect to be treated equally, but we do expect to be treated equitably. We feel that it's not the case at the moment. RTE has over many years arrived at a position where it is something of a looming behemoth in the Irish media landscape and indeed in Irish society. It is that because its activities and policies impact on all aspects of Irish media: independent broadcasting, newspapers and the internet. It seems if RTE sneezes, we all catch pneumonia. And indeed, sometimes when RTE has a cold, it can seem as if it acts like it has man flu. That is why we are concerned about them. While I am positive about RTE, I also feel I should be straight in relation to how I perceive them, and I do so out of respect. It seems often that they have the best of both worlds. It has seen its commercial revenue decline, but it has the safety net of the licence fee. It operates often on a ruthlessly competitive basis in the commercial sphere, citing its obligations which oblige it to maximise its revenue, which the legislation does, and we believe it needs to be changed. It can claim to be a public service broadcaster on the one hand and seek audiences by whatever means necessary on the other. It can justify closing its London bureau, saving perhaps $1 million a year, for example, and yet justify almost $170,000 as the cost of the coverage of the new Pope being elected, and having reporters stationed in Mauritius for a few months covering a murder trial. They have cut services, but still they're at a situation where the report carried out by PwC seems to indicate that the average salaries in RTE are €69,000. I don't for a minute doubt the challenges facing Noel Curran and his team, and I wish them well. They have cut $30 million from their budget, but in the context of a company within the region of $300 million of revenue, this is not a huge achievement. I would suggest that if RTE need help in cutting another $30 million, many of the CEOs of independent radio stations would be able to help, because we've done that as well. I don't have much experience of cutting anybody from 750,000 to 500,000, but I have too much experience of cutting people from 30,000 to 25,000. I know I am being fiercely critical of RTE, and I'm not saying that all independent stations are perfect. We're not all delivering public service broadcasting. Some people have no wish to do that. But independent broadcasters are deserving of nurturing for our audiences, for our staff, and for the employers we are, who make a significant contribution to the Irish economy. So how do we do this? The principle of making a reasonable proportion of the licence fee available to independent broadcasters has long been accepted through the Sound and Vision scheme. So arguing over whether we should get some of the licence fee or not seems as a red herring. But the Sound and Vision scheme requires refurbishment and refocus. We want a scheme to allow the deepening of quality offered in news, sport, current affairs, and investment to enable better and broader and more unique coverage of the type that RTE cannot deliver. But it's not the only issue. RTE's unfettered commercial mandate is damaging to a range of media and does not help RTE in its delivery of its public service obligations. We've been encouraged by the commitment in the programme for government to review the funding of public and independent broadcasters to ensure a healthy broadcasting environment in Ireland. We have been in dialogue with the Minister and have been heartened to see his recognition of the public service content on independent broadcasters and the need to take our requirements into account. We know that the recognition of the public service role is widely shared by many groups across Irish society in the public, private and voluntary realm. We've been overwhelmed by the positive response we've received, and we're very encouraged and heartened by the pledges of support. However, we have concerns that while the commitment in the programme for government remains in place, what is happening in reality and the way it appears that the requirements of RTE are being examined in isolation to the bigger picture threatens to make the commitment redundant. The BAI recently engaged consultants to report on the funding of RTE and to examine how changes in their funding might impact on them. The Minister, we understand, will shortly receive this. But once again, we believe that the plight of RTE must not be viewed in isolation, and that A report on the value for money provided by RTE is not the same as reviewing the funding for public and independent broadcasting to ensure a healthy broadcasting environment. The Minister will have to legislate to enable changes for the broadcasting charge, and we urge that this legislation should not just ensure that RTE can keep going as it is, but that the programme for government commitment is put in place. We believe that a win-win outcome is possible, which ensures a sustainable RTE fit for purpose to provide public service broadcasting and an improving, growing and developing independent sector. But there is an appalling vista of failure which cannot be underestimated. An independent sector where over time, due to economic forces that we are powerless to resist, it is no longer viable to continue to provide much of the public service content that we currently engage in. Some people say you do it anyway. It's what people want. In the current environment, that is a dangerous assumption. And there is the danger that RTE could become irrelevant and anachronistic. Perhaps not this year or next year, but in 5, 10, 15 or 20 years, because truly radical change was introduced when it was most needed. So there are 4 elements that we'd like to see to craft a win-win solution for Irish audiences. Focus RTE on clear public service activities which only it can provide. This would require a huge change in culture and emphasis. Clearly define RTE's commercial mandate to revoke its licence to act like a proverbial commercial bull in a china shop in order to achieve its commercial objectives. Use imagination in the use of public money and use the additional revenue from the broadcasting charge also to support news, sport, talk and information programming across independent radio stations. We believe that this can be a daunting challenge, but it is achievable. It can be brought about even in the face of the most difficult challenges without any additional charges on people who pay the licence fee. We are realists. Though we have 7% of the market, we are not expecting 67% of public funding. But we are seeking fair play and equitable treatment. We've had constructive engagement with the Minister. We are engaging with RTE on more levels, I would suggest, than ever before. RTE's Director General attended this conference last year, and I've met him and found him constructive and positive. But to a large extent, this most important debate is being conducted in silos, where all the major players are engaged in bilateral communication, megaphone diplomacy, such as today a bit, for example, and putting our best feet forward in the public domain. I think we have a fantastic opportunity to show the Irish people how public and private can work together with the scarce resources at our disposal to improve the services provided to the Irish public with imagination and creativity. We should embark on this in a spirit of constructiveness and positivity to see how RTE and the independents can work together to serve Irish audiences. Now, more than ever, Ireland needs a strong and vibrant broadcasting landscape. And so I'd like to call for a 3-way engagement between the Minister, independent broadcasters and RTE to see how we can make change work for everyone, for independent stations, for RTE, but for most of all about the Irish public. A meeting where we can see if the divergent interests of public and private can bring about a solution that serves the listener. We have shown over the last 25 years that we can provide a service that people want. We are eager to work with the Minister and with RTE to ensure we can guarantee there will be a vigorous, viable and constructive Irish radio landscape rooted in Ireland, reflecting Ireland and based in Ireland 25 years from now. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate I went on, but I would now like to call on Minister Pat Rabbitte to make a speech.